This week's mini lecture is on organizational structure. Organizational structure is the way in which job tasks are formally divided, grouped, and coordinated within an organization. Hopefully your organizational structure doesn't look too much like the image that's on the bottom right of your screen. There are 6 elements of organizational structure. The first is work specialization, and this is the degree to which tasks in an organization are subdivided into separate jobs. The second is departmentalization. This is the basis by which jobs in an organization are grouped together. So again, going back to this definition, the way that tasks in an organization are divided, grouped, and coordinated. The chain of command is the unbroken line of authority that extends from the top of the organization to the bottom, and it clarifies who reports to whom. Span of control is the number of subordinates a manager can efficiently and effectively direct. And keep in mind that phrase, efficiently and effectively. Span of control set in an organization may not necessarily result in efficient and effective management. Centralization is the degree to which decision-making is concentrated at a single point in an organization. And lastly, formalization is the degree to which jobs within an organization are standardized. Every organizational structure has each of these 6 elements in a specific way that's suited to the structure for that organization, depending on its mission, depending on what the organization produces, whether it's a manufacturing organization or a service organization. But we can describe any organizational structure in terms of these 6 elements. There are a number of traditional organizational designs that can be found. A simple structure is one that's not elaborate. It's widely used in small businesses. A simple structure is fast, flexible, inexpensive, but it's risky. So simple structures typically involve 1 or 2, maybe 3 individuals that perform different tasks or are in charge of different aspects of a business. The reason why this is risky is because if one person leaves or if one person isn't available to handle that, typically there isn't a lot of backfill that's available. The next type of organizational design that's traditional is bureaucratic designs. Bureaucratic designs are characterized by standardization, routine tasks, a high level of formalization, centralized authority and decision-making, and narrow spans of control. The great thing about bureaucratic designs is that they're efficient. Below you see 4 different types of bureaucratic designs: functional, product, divisional, and geographic. In a functional bureaucratic design, people are grouped by functional area within the organization. So you will have an accounting department, for example. You'll have a sales department, maybe a marketing department, supply chain department. So all of the people that work in one functional area are in that functional group. The next type of bureaucratic design is a product bureaucratic design. In this case, individuals are organized around a product rather than the functions that they serve within an organization. Big conglomerates like P&G are a good example of a product bureaucratic design. For example, the laundry detergent Tide is set up such that you have within that group, within that product group for Tide, you have accountants, you have marketers, you have R&D, you have manufacturing. So there are several different functions that all come together around that one product. The benefit of this is that you have a focus on the product and optimizing the product, and the conceptualization of optimizing that product is held within the group, within the bureaucratic design. Rather than be siloed like functional organizations, the functions are all centered around the product. The next bureaucratic design is divisional. This is also applicable, probably best described as applicable to large conglomerate organizations. So United Technologies, for example, has a divisional structure. So they've got Otis elevators and escalators, Sikorsky helicopters. GE is another fantastic example. GE has GE Finance. They sell appliances, and they have other kind of major businesses, almost standalone businesses that are divisions within the overall organization. So the divisional bureaucratic design is more of a high-level bureaucratic design. The last bureaucratic design that I have here for you is geographic. And in this case, the organization individuals in the organization are grouped together according to the geography that they serve. So Coca-Cola is a great example of this. They have Coke US, Coke South America, Coke Africa, and so forth. One of the main advantages of having a geographic bureaucratic design is that the product that you're producing can be tailored to the geographic region. And if in fact you've ever tried Coke around the world, you may notice that the taste of Coke is different. And that's because Coke is customizing according to the preferences of consumers in that geographic region. The matrix structure is not technically considered a traditional organizational design, but we do see this more and more in organizations, and I would kind of consider this a traditional type of organizational structure. A matrix structure has dual lines of authority, typically combining functional and product departmentalization. So you will see on the chart here that there's a little circle around an intersection, and the intersection there is product manager C and the manufacturing vice president. So this individual that's sitting where that little circle is has two bosses. One boss is the manufacturing vice president, and the other boss is the product manager for product C. Now, the advantage of this is that that person sitting there at that intersection has a strategic view of the organization. So they see the organization through the lens of manufacturing, but they also see the organization through the lens of the product manager. So their conceptual skills are typically much better than in a more traditional organization. So if you think of a functional organization where all the accountants, for example, accounting and finance people are all in the accounting and finance department, they're not going to have a lot of visibility to different functions as you see across the top here: design, manufacturing, marketing, etc. In a matrix structure, you might have an accounting and finance person. So let's go all the way over to the controller, second from the right. The person that sits at the intersection of product manager C and controller, it's not circled there, it's a couple over from where the circle is, that person is going to be serving an accounting and finance role with the product manager for product C. And they're going to know a lot about product C, and they're also going to know a lot about what happens in terms of the accounting and finance function within the organization. So their conceptual skills will be greater. Typically, this is more helpful for people in developing themselves in the workplace and for moving up. The main disadvantage should be pretty clear to you in that everybody that sits at the intersections in this chart, they're all going to have two bosses. And oftentimes those two bosses are at odds with each other. I myself was in a situation where I worked in a matrix organization, and it was actually two functional areas. So whereas this graph shows functional across the top and product down the left-hand side, the matrix structure that I worked in was functional and functional. And so I reported to the senior vice president of manufacturing, and I also reported to the vice president of finance for supply chain. Those two individuals had differing goals, differing requirements from the organization, and so it was challenging being that person at the intersection that you see here, that person that sits in that little circle there. It's challenging trying to balance the needs and the goals and the desires of two different organizations, functional organizations that are naturally at odds with each other. And so in this case here, the manufacturing vice president may have issues balancing production across products A, B, C, and D. And so that might mean that the person sitting at that intersection has certain pressures coming from the manufacturing vice president as a result of trying to balance production across those products. At the same time, that person is also reporting to product manager C, and so we'll have pressure and an incentive to favor product manager C when discussing whatever is going on with the manufacturing vice president. This can get actually pretty challenging. In some cases, the goals of the two different organizations that the individual is a part of are very disparate from each other, and so you kind of find yourself in a situation where you really can't do much. If you do one thing, then it's a problem in one area, but if you do something else, it's a problem in the other area. So it can be really challenging. It also can help you develop your skills in working with others and managing above you within the organization, because oftentimes you're going to be the person that has to bridge the gap. In this case, the gap between the manufacturing vice president and product manager C. Virtual organizations are becoming more and more prevalent within the workplace. These are small core organizations that outsource major business functions. They outsource things such as the things that are in the chart here in front of you: manufacturing, design, logistics, finance, sales, and marketing. The idea here is that what's kept at the core is what gives the company its competitive advantage, and then anything that isn't what gives the company its competitive advantage is something that's outsourced. Logistics is a function that is commonly outsourced within organizations. There are a lot of other organizations that do logistics really well and can meet the needs of an organization without having to have logistics in-house. Another kind of common, a couple of common functions that are outsourced are payroll and accounting. So a core company may have no payroll department, but they outsource payroll to ADP, for example. The advantages of this is that the organization can be very flexible. So in a virtual organization, for example, oftentimes the core company will have multiple companies that they work with in each functional area. So in this case, let's say, for example, the core company might have 2, 3, 4, or more manufacturing companies that they deal with. And so if one manufacturing company doesn't have the capacity to produce what they want, what the core company wants to have produced, they can go to another manufacturing company. And so they experience a greater degree of flexibility because of that capability of outsourcing. The major disadvantage of a virtual organization is that it takes a lot to manage all of these outsourced business functions. So within the core company, you've got to have a person or a group of people that are managing the relationships between the core company and any organizations that are outsourced. So in this case, you'd have to have somebody or a group of people managing the relationships with manufacturing companies, design companies, logistics companies, finance companies, and sales and marketing companies. And you can imagine that that can get kind of complex. So coordination within the core company can get a little bit complex to the extent that functions are outsourced to other organizations. This is a really funky chart. So I don't want you to get too hung up on the weirdness of the image there. Another organization, this is kind of an extension of the virtual organization that's becoming more popular, is the boundaryless organization. This is an organization that does not have a chain of command. There's a limitless span of control, and departments are replaced with empowered teams. Probably the best example that I can think of is W.L. Gore and Associates. The way that things happen in Gore is that somebody comes up with an idea. They pitch that idea to the best people they can to help them get that idea from the idea stage to a marketable product that's under production. The way that this works kind of logistically is that they have to go around and they have to sell their idea. So their span of control can be as small as it needs to be or as large as it needs to be. You might end up working, if you have a great idea, you might end up working with people from around the world who do different things. And so the span of control is very flexible in this situation, and it's all around this idea and how to get this idea into a marketable product. And so there are no departments within W.L. Gore and Associates. Very few people have actual job titles. Usually the people that have job titles are those that interact with people outside of the organization. PR, for example, and higher level executives. And so the individual that comes up with the idea then becomes the leader of an empowered team. And Gore gives their associates, gives their employees the resources that they need when the idea is good and it can be marketed, it can be developed and marketed. The organization gives that empowered team a lot of resources to make that happen. And so if you kind of look at this graph, just kind of look at it from a high level view, don't drill down too much on it. What will happen is that the individual or the team that comes together around this product or this idea is then going to cherry pick functional areas that are needed to get from idea to market. And so if something requires chemists, then chemists will be brought in. If something requires metallurgists, then metallurgists will be brought in. Advantages to this are that the organizations are very flexible. It encourages innovation. And it also fosters leadership. One of the major disadvantages to this type of an organization is that it has the potential to be inefficient. So you lose the efficiency that you get with a more bureaucratic style in favor of innovation. Structure and strategy have a specific relationship with each other. And in a sense, the answer to the question which determines which is both. Structure at times determines strategy, and strategy at times determines structure. There are three major strategies, and this is an oversimplification of what you'll get in another class. The three major strategies are innovation, cost minimization, and imitation. Elements that impact the decision of how to structure your organization around that strategy include the size of your organization, the technology available to you, and environmental factors. And I'll give you an example of two organizations that are very innovative but have very different structures. So I just talked about W.L. Gore and Associates being highly innovative, and they have a very flat, boundaryless structure. On the other hand, 3M is also a highly innovative organization. However, they have a very formal bureaucratic structure. And so both of these organizations, for different reasons, they have a similar strategy in that they're innovators, but because of size, technology, environmental factors, the age of the company, in the case of 3M, it's over 100 years old. It's well over 100 years old. And so that might have an impact on the fact that that organization is much more bureaucratic than W.L. Gore and Associates. So when thinking about the structure strategy question, there are some key questions and areas to look for answers. So again, remember that structure is how organizations group, divide, and coordinate people and tasks. So there are 6 key questions here, and the answer to those key questions is provided by one of the 6 determinants of how an organization is structured. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just talk about the first one as an example. So the first key question is, to what extent do you want activities subdivided into separate jobs? So to what extent do you want to have work specialization? This refers to how people are divided, or how tasks are divided within a group. So there are some patterns that we typically see when it comes to the strategy-structure relationship. For innovation, we typically see a loose structure with low specialization and formalization and decentralization of authority and decision-making. An organization that adopts a cost minimization strategy typically has tight control, extensive work specialization, high formalization, and centralization. So cost minimization strategy typically means that you're going to have a bureaucratic organization because that bureaucratic structure is more efficient and more cost effective. Lastly, an organization that takes an imitation strategy will have a mix of these properties. They'll typically have tight control over current activities, but looser control over new opportunities that they're pursuing. So why do we talk about organizational structure in a class on organizational behavior? The answer is, organizational structure determines how people are going to interact with each other. And those interactions, that's all about what organizational behavior is about. So the structure of an organization lays the groundwork for all of the other things that we talk about. So in terms of leadership, think about the difference between what leadership might look like in a bureaucratic organization versus a boundaryless organization. Negotiations. How might that work differently between a bureaucratic and a boundaryless organization? Motivation. Every single topic that we cover in this class may be applied differently depending on the organizational structure that's present within the organization. And that's all I have for you.